Okay, picking back up, we're still on that slide of four major budgets. The third type of budget is a cash flow budget. And once you've established your operating budget of the revenue that's going to come in and the expenses that are going to go out, then you need to build the budget based on when those are occurring to make sure that you can meet your payroll, to make sure that you have the funds coming in to be able to spend them for capital expenditures and things like that. Because there's certain times when maybe you have larger volumes during the year and you're going to get a lot of revenue in during that time. Then there may be other times, for instance in the summer, that you see your volumes drop off and you're going to see your revenue drop off, and you're going to need to make sure that you've held enough money so that you can get through with all your regular expenses through those months. So that's where the cash flow budget comes in, is it really looks at, okay, what is coming in, what is going out, what do we need to hold on to, when is it going to be dispersed, and how do we make sure that we have a consistent amount of money all the way along to cover all of our needs. So that's where the cash flow budget comes, but that comes after the operating budget. So the operating budget comes second, then the cash flow budget, and then the last one is the capital budget. And you've probably heard of capital budget. Those are planned expenditures over a certain amount for major purchases. And some organizations will be generous and they'll say anything for a capital budget that's over $1,000, that anything over $1,000, that has to be approved for the capital budget. And you have to go through a process, fill out forms, go and justify, prove your need, those types of things before it's approved. And typically capital budgets have a certain amount of money that's given to them every year that's allocated for that purpose. And when the money's gone, the money's gone. Unless there's something emergent that comes up and they have to figure out where they're going to pull the money from. Is it going to come from reserves? Is it going to come from savings? Those types of things. So it can be as little as $250. I have been in organizations where it's been as little as $100, which is craziness, because then you're justifying everything all the time. But most places it's somewhere between 500 and 1,000, which makes a lot more sense. In some places $250. It's whatever the organization decides. So those are the four major budgets. It's the statistics, it's the operating, cash flow, and capital equipment. Those are the four budgets. And then under operating budget, it can be based on activity, incremental, zero-based, or value proposition. So that gives you slide number 2 and kind of explains through that. So what are some healthcare budgeting challenges? Well, if you look at traditional budgeting barriers, you see that there are some times where dollars follow specific units or departments, not necessarily processes, patients, or outcomes, and that can be an issue. Annual operating budgets are typically very rigid. You're held to them. Once they're approved and they're done, they're carved in stone, and that's something you're just going to have to live with. It's inflexible to change and innovation. You have to plan ahead. It's difficult when organizations link their operating budgets and their capital budgets, their timelines and things like that, because again, that forces you into being inflexible when it comes to certain annual expenses, or when you have certain activities that come up, there's just that inflexibility because they're in lockstep. So some organizations have moved to kind of pulling those apart and not making them linked in terms of their timelines or processes or the dollars, those types of things. Then probably the biggest that you'll see in organizations are conflicting or confusing priorities. Everyone doesn't always agree. They may agree on the total number of the budget, but they may not agree where the money is going to be spent, and that's a challenge. When you have the board thinking one thing, the medical staff wanting something else, you've got administration that's trying something, a third route, and then you have senior leaders who may have pet projects that they want to do, and then you may have things that were long promised before the current CEO came into being, or before the current situation with the board and the medical staff. Maybe something was promised 7 years ago and now it's time to do it. Are they still going to do it? Is the need still there? Those types of things. So there can be conflicting or confusing priorities. And how do you make sure everybody's on board, everybody's agreeing, this is the direction we're all going to go and this is what we're going to be held accountable to? So that's definitely challenging. volume projections versus actual volumes. It's like having a very fuzzy crystal ball and you're trying to predict what's going to happen. How do you know if your volumes are going to go up? How much are they going to go up? Are they going to go down? What happens if you have a catastrophic event? You know, the tornadoes in Tennessee just happened. What happens if your hospital gets hit by a tornado and suddenly you're in rebuilding mode and your volumes have gone through the floor? And how does that affect budgeting and the entire process? Or you have a flood, or you have a hurricane if you're in that area of the country. So there's all these things that are very difficult to plan ahead. And if you think back, probably, I don't know, about 10 years ago, we had some problems with the economy, where the economy dropped out, and there were issues with people not pursuing health care because they needed their money for other things. And so, you know, sometimes those are unexpected and you can't always predict how that's going to play out with volumes versus actuals. So again, fuzzy crystal ball situation. Then there are unpredictable costs. Do drug companies change costs on things? Oh yes, all the time. They increase costs, and they usually don't decrease costs. They usually increase costs, and there's not always a way of knowing which drugs are going to get increased, which ones are going to hit market, and how much are they going to be, who's going to, you know, which drugs are going to switch to generic, is that going to drop the price, how much is it going to drop the price. And then you think about coronaviruses, you know, something like new that's like the coronavirus this year. How do you plan for that? We didn't know last year that we were going to have the coronavirus this year. What is the vaccine going to cost? What are the drugs that they're using, the antivirals they're using on this, going to cost? Have we planned for patients that are going to have this, are going to come into the hospital, or are going to come into the doctor's office? What are they going to need? How much are they going to need? Are they going to need significant care? What if you don't have enough negative air pressure rooms, because these are contagious patients, so you need to put them in a negative air pressure environment? So if you do all that and you need, all of a sudden you run out of negative air pressure rooms, what are you going to do? How much is it going to cost to convert? And how many rooms are you going to convert? And how long will it take you? All of a sudden you've got capital expenses you weren't planning on and all sorts of things. So there's always unpredictable costs. New medical and surgical technology. Procedures are going from inpatient to outpatient all the time as they become less and less invasive. And that changes things too, as well as instrumentation, as well as implants. And the costs of those sometimes are very unpredictable. Legal reserves. That's where an organization typically will they will set aside money for legal reasons. Could be compliance, that they come across an audit and they find out, oh, I'm going to have to pay back Medicare for this. So they need money for that. It could be settlements. They usually know what cases they have going and in general what they're going to pay out if they decide to settle those. Or if they don't settle them and they go to court and they lose, what kind of money is that going to be for a payout, and how do we set that money aside? Those are called legal reserves. And organizations typically have to establish a legal reserve as part of the budget because that money has to be set aside, that it's there in case it's needed. Then changes in federal regs and reimbursement. Do the feds ever change their mind about regulations or reimbursement? Of course they do. Do they always give us notice? Of course not. So those are things that are challenging to budgets. How do you make sure all that is taken into consideration when you're looking at it at least a year in advance, if not 2 years, almost 2 years? So the next slide is budgeting steps. The timing, and budgeting is all about timing, completeness, and accuracy. Boy, it sounds like HIM right there. Timing, completeness, and accuracy. So the first thing you do is you build your budgeting team. Who's going to be involved? What are their tasks? What do they need to do? Then you set your financial goals. What's the time frame for completion, and what are the overall priorities? Then you forecast your volumes and break them down by payer or reimbursement type. Then based on the operating cash flow budgets, you create a capital budget with time frames and priorities. You build a cash flow budget based on the operating budget. And then you, I'm sorry, I got that backwards, didn't I? Apologize for that. After you forecast your volumes and break them down by payer reimbursement type, then you, based on your volumes, you create that operating budget for revenues and expenses. Then you build that cash flow budget, and then you do your capital one. So I had it backwards, sorry about that. So forecast your volumes, Then you create your operating budget, then you do your cash flow budget, then you do your capital budget, then you obtain approvals. Well, it can take a while to get through all the approval processes. It's not just the senior leaders. You have a medical staff that needs to buy in, at least their leadership. You need to take it to the board. If your hospital is owned by the county usually has to give a blessing or has to be aware of it. If you're part of a corporate situation, corporate has to go over it and approve it and give it their blessing as well. And then you publish the budget and get it out to everybody, because anybody that's going to be held accountable for the budget needs a chance to see it and plan ahead as to what they're going to do and how they're going to do it. And then you monitor the budget. Some places monitor them weekly, every 2 weeks, every month, and they look at the actuals versus the budget and see what they need to do to make sure that they stay within their budget. It's great if revenues go over budget. That's wonderful. It's great if volumes go over budget, but it's not so great if expenses do. And so that's really where you see a lot of the activity with accountability and compliance. So that is the slide on budgeting. The next one is a sample department budget, and that is a nursing budget. A nursing department budget, and I just copied and pasted this one in here because it's a great example where you can see the line items and the numbers and how they're looking at it on a monthly basis and those types of things. So it gives you good categories. So some things you don't want to forget to budget for with the HIM department budget. You want to make sure you have those updated references. You want to make sure you plan for your fees and CEUs. Increases, if there's going to be a salary or overtime education hour benefits increase and your organization expects you to do that, you're going to want to make sure you take those into consideration. Contract services, is the price going to change between this year and next year for contract coding? And if you didn't need contract coding last year, are you going to need it this year? Do you have a planned maternity leave? Do you have a planned retirement? Do you need temp services? Are you doing some kind of renovations or relocation that are going to disrupt your activities and give you and you're going to need that extra help? Equipment costs. You want to look at, are you going to be replacing equipment or are you going to be adding new equipment, and what's that going to cost and how's that going to work? Department chargebacks. Typically, if you have a break room, you need break room supplies, and those get charged back to usually food services or dietary or housekeeping or other departments like that. If you provide infection control items like masks and hand sanitizer, sometimes that gets charged back. Catering, if you have medical staff meetings or other really important meetings that have been approved for catering, you got to make sure that you budget for that. Marketing materials, it's a good idea to look at marketing materials and how you do that. We in the past where I worked, we developed a release of information brochure that we had that was available to people to take, that was helpful to them, gave them the information, and it folded out into an authorization form. If you do a lot of recruiting, or if you want to just have a brochure for recruiting, there's that kind of thing, and there might be a marketing charge associated with that, or a publishing charge, print shop charge, those types of things. Travel and mileage. If you have to go between sites, or if you're planning to drive to the state meeting or things like that, you need to make sure those are budgeted. And then any anticipated changes, renovations, relocations, new software, new furnishings, changes in vendors, staffing increases, staffing decreases. If you're going to replace aging equipment, all of that has to be planned for and budgeted for, and the money has to be there. So it's one of those things, don't forget, because if you forget, it's going to be really hard to make it up. Then the page of examples, basically what I did was I created two types of budgets using Excel and just copied and pasted them in for you to be able to see. The top one is line item, and it has everything that's non-salaried, and it just gives you an idea of if you spent current year and you were given a 3% increase, how it would look. And then the bottom one is a sample employee wage salary type situation with how many FTEs, what is their current salary, what are their benefits, overtime hours, and then how does that roll up into total wage costs, to just give you an idea. I wish I'd kept some of my old budgeting information so that I had it, but I don't. The last page is references and resources. Those are places that I went to gather some information that's current that I thought would be helpful to you. So feel free to click on those references and take a look at those articles or information in a little bit more detail. So thank you so much. Hope all is going well with you. Good luck with this week with budgeting, and I'll talk to you again soon. Bye.